Default constructors. We have 4 different types of constructors. The first one is default constructor. What is default constructor? A constructor without any arguments or with the default value for every argument is said to be default constructor. See the second point, a constructor without any arguments, this is fine, or with the default value for every argument is said to be default constructor. I would like to highlight one point here. We studied about the default arguments to functions. We studied a concept, there exists a concept, default arguments to functions. See, when I have a function add, I can write here, x comma y and write the logic here. Even I can write like this, no, add x comma y equal to 0. We wrote like this. In this case, I can call the function add with the 10 comma 20, it will do the addition, or it can even call with the 10. No, while doing function overloading, we will doing this. So these are called the default arguments. These are called the default arguments. We studied these things in the functions concept. You may please go back and recall this concept of default arguments in functions, right? So default constructor, a constructor without any arguments or with some default values for every argument is said to be default constructor. Okay, so a constructor has 0 parameter list or no arguments. It is also called as 0 argument constructor. It's also called as 0 argument constructor. Okay, if default constructor is not defined in the source code by the programmer, if we don't define the default constructor, then the compiler defines the default implicitly. Actually, the process of executing a program based on OOPS concept, means based on class and object concept, it definitely should have a constructor. If you are not defining a constructor, compiler automatically is creating a default constructor. It means in all the programs here like this, if I have a program, no, some student with some numbers here, okay, and there is some function display, I am creating an object. If you don't have this part, and if you don't have this function also, what will happen when you create an object? A default constructor is implicitly created by the compiler with something like this: student, open, close, that's it, nothing else. It is implicitly created and executed. Okay, it is implicitly created and executed, right? It is very, very important point in default constructors. In default constructor, it is, if it is not defined by the programmer, by us, then the compiler defines the default constructor during compilation phase. Okay, what will happen if I define it? If I define it manually, right? You see, maybe this is one example. I have defined a constructor here. We are saying that if you are not defining, compiler is by default creating it. Compiler is by default defining it and executing it. But if you define, that one will not be executed. Compiler will not do anything. It will not implicitly create a constructor. Okay, so let's see the next point. If the default constructor is defined explicitly, then the compiler will not define the implicitly. Okay, it will call the one which you have defined. It will not create anything automatically. But if you are not giving, it is creating. So it means till now whatever class programs you have written, everywhere a default constructor was being created, was being defined by the compiler during the compile phase. Okay, because object initialization cannot happen without the help of constructors. We need constructors for that. We need the help of constructors, but we are learning it now, right? So what is the syntax of that? Simply class name. Since it is a default constructor, it will not have any arguments. So class name, open round bracket, write the statements and close. Open round bracket, write the, see, there are no arguments in this default constructor like this. Class name, function, since we are saying it's a function, you have to give round brackets, then flower bracket, body of the constructor and close it. Okay, let's see some programs to understand. We will be executing them in the next session, but we will theoretically we will see each of them in the next session we will be seeing them, we will be executing each of those concepts and see the output. See here, default constructor example, right? Do we have? No, right. So I have a class A, I have some variable, public variable int sum equal to 0, int sum equal to 0, right? So here again it's a demonstration of this is your default constructor. This A open bracket and putting semicolon is default constructor. Okay, see, A object 1, 10 and 20, right? Default constructor with some default values, default constructor with some default values like this. So 10 comes here, 20 comes here, sum equal to A plus X. So sum becomes 30, sum becomes 30, right? So again I am calling object 2 with 5, object 2 with 5, what is happening here? This 2, this is becoming 5, this remains 0. This is becoming 5, this remains 0. Okay, so this way, what is default constructor? A constructor which does not have any parameters. This one, I'm not doing anything there. I'm not doing anything there. But I have another constructor with some default arguments. With some default arguments, right? So these are called default constructors. Okay, so you can maybe here it is not clearly quoted this example, but you see this here. Instead of this, I'll write here, I'll create object A, class A, object obj1, class A, object obj1, right? So what will happen here? When I will write in the public, I will write this, and I will give here sum equal to 20. There is one variable sum, right? I'll be giving here sum is equal to 20 and close it. When you close this, what will happen? As soon as you created object obj1, right, that object obj1, this is executed, this block is executed. After execution, what is happening? It is making sum equal to 20. So the variable sum becomes 20 now. Okay, so this is just a demonstration of how default constructor can be used. Okay, so this is again, I should not have this way. It is a constructor can have no arguments, or it can have some default arguments like this. That also can be considered as a default constructor. In functions, we have the concept of default arguments. Okay, so I will erase this. This is the actual demonstration of the default constructors example. I can create a function without any arguments. I can create a function with some default arguments, right? So this is an example of default constructors in C++.